Welcome to the Week 10 wrap-up at the 16th season of Blood, Sweat, and Beers. Have you ever had one of those seasons where it seems like everything you do doesn't work? That it seems early in the season you've got these gut feelings and you read some of the reports and what other people think might happen. You feel good about certain decisions, and over the course of 2/3 of the season you realize that every time you make a gut reaction or a decision based on how it feels, it turns out badly. And then maybe at some point along the way you've realized that, and then you try to trick your gut and you say, oh, I think this would work, I'm going to do the opposite, and it still turns out badly. I feel like that's where I am, and then I start wondering, why am I trusting my gut? My gut doesn't watch the games. My gut doesn't read the in-depth analysis. My gut doesn't listen to all the other prognosticators and the fantasy football gurus. Why am I listening to my gut in the first place? It really becomes quite the rabbit hole. Anyway, let's just look back at Week 10. We look at the scores. Your commish dropped an ugly fourth in a row, and with just 121 points is now in last place as far as points scored. So AB gets a bump up, secures his position there in the number one spot, not locked in by any means, but doing plenty to keep himself not only in the playoff hunt, we'll look at the percentages, but also to get that first round bye by winning the division. Just a couple games ahead, 4 games left. We'll see how it turns out. But looking at what could have been, both teams left some points on the bench. AB did a pretty good job, comes in at a 93% for his pop. And obviously, when you've got a 42-point swing at one position, Burrow went off again, Jaden Daniels struggled. That's going to ruin that percentage. So that would have been the easy win. I actually could have beaten AB by a few tenths of a point, 1/10 of a point, with another double tight end situation, even with Burrow on the bench. But obviously that would have been nearly impossible to predict or figure out. So AB stays at the top. Your commish slides, still has an outside shot to make the playoffs. We'll see what happens there. All right, as we look at Mr. Snuffy, he just keeps rolling. It's getting kind of ugly here for the rest of us. Secures his place, top the first, keeps that going, but also locks in his playoff spot. First team to secure a spot in the playoffs. Just continues to do just enough to get through. Obviously, this wasn't too difficult as you look at what could have been. Joe was 93+% to his best score, which still wouldn't have been enough to be able to take out Mr. Snuffy. So I don't know. Is this become the Snuffleupagus League? Do we need to change the name to Blood, Sweat, and Keiths? I don't know. That would be a terrible name. That was not good. We would have come up with something better. We would ask some of our preteens to come up with a much better name for our league. But that may be the case. We'll have to see. But rich get richer, poor get poorer, as we see Joe drops another, and Mr. Snuffy, Keith, picks up another. Our next game, Jersey Birds and Booger Pickers. Man, so every time I feel bad about losing however many in a row I have, 4 at this point, I just look to Ian and say, well, he's lost 6 in a row now. So that makes me feel not much better because we both have the same record. But regardless, Booger Pickers stumbled a little bit, it looked like, but has been strong here the past few weeks overall, and locks himself into the second place there in the Eastern Division. We look at what could have been, and we pick up another 100% pop fantastic job from Ian locking in his best lineup. Sadly, it wasn't enough to secure the win. And obviously, CD, or is it DC? Don Chris? Yeah, Don Chris. DC left a bunch of points on the bench, so he could have won by even more. But regardless, we see the separation there continuing to happen in the East, which will have some obvious playoff implications. One more game. The game of the week. Tenths of points. This is at least exciting, even though it had few playoff implications. Gloop fighting for his playoff life, just holding on by a string. But because of the 3 tenths that Aaron was able to get, well, he gets himself a solid second place in the West, which gives him a much better shot at making the playoffs. Not guaranteed yet, but he's getting pretty close. So we look at what could have been from these guys. Both did fairly well. Gloop would have really had to make a strong case. He would have had to have his best roster to win. And I know the numbers were super close, but it really just came down to one adjustment, trying to work one other player into his lineup, trying to get the 10 points that Tony Pollard had, kind of work that in there. He could have done it. It would have been pretty difficult for him. So not great, but Aaron solid at 6-4. So our final game of the week, it was Pancho and Puzzles. And so for all of the scoring that Pancho had done, he did not do this past week. That was a rough game, almost the lowest score of the week by just 1.5 points or so behind Pet Detectives, but had made a strong run to get into the thick of the playoff race, but stumbled a little bit, especially within the division and especially to Puzzles. So Seth now has that one game up on him for the playoffs. We look at what could have been, and we get another 100% pop. Nicely done, Seth. This was a good pop, a good 100%, because it was in support of a win. And even though Pancho did an excellent job at 97%, that tells us that nothing he would have done, could have done, would have gotten him the win. So as a slide for Pancho, is it back to business as usual? Was the 3-4 games that he had there just recently, was that the anomaly, or will he right the ship again? Will he get back on track and make that push for the playoffs? We'll have to see. As we look at our standings, we have our first, again, I say, the first guaranteed playoff spot. Mr. Snuffy locked in his playoff spot, so he will be there. Now he's just fighting for that number 1 or 2 seed so that he can take the first week off. And then he'll be that much closer to an unprecedented, well, he's already got the unprecedented third. This will be the unprecedented fourth. Regardless, it may make most of us, some of us, just give up after this season. But regardless, so we take a look, and again, we got a little bit of separation again. In the West, we still continue to have no ties as far as records go. In the East, we've got a tie at the bottom, but we're in a position now, especially if you give any credence to the playoff percentage. This has happened in the past where getting close to the end of the season, it became possible for an entire division to make the playoffs. So it'll be interesting to see if that were to happen. It's a long shot for sure, but it's still a possibility with 4 games left. We've got a month's worth of games, and so even at a 3% chance, Gloop can make the playoffs. Needs an enormous amount of help, but it's still possible. As we look at our season stats, this is kind of an interesting one because at this point, yes, we see the overall rankings, and we know that all of those 3, 4, and 6 teams that are Poncho, Jersey Birds, and Master and Commanders at this point are all fighting for that number 6 spot. But again, 4 games left, that could move around just a little bit. But what's interesting is Poncho he gives way for the top scoring team. He's now only number 2. He is 8 points behind our number 1 team, Mr. Snuffy. So that's going to make it difficult to knock him off his perch as he becomes the top scoring team. Now, I will say that if you look at points against, well, Mr. Snuffy has the second fewest points against. And so, you could say, well, no one's scoring against him. And so obviously these are just averages. You could have a high game and a low game. And when you get a low game, if somebody else is scoring points against you, that's where you get your loss. But if you're scoring the most, it doesn't hurt to have few points against you either. But something else to note, while AB is in first place in the West, he has only the second most points scored. Yes, your commish has now got the honor for fewest points. We've been fighting back and forth with Pet Detectives, who's launched himself up into the number 8 spot. So Read Option has the second fewest points scored, which works out for him because he has by far the fewest points against. Probably a large part of his success here this season. So I can tell you that not scoring points and having points not scored against you is not a recipe for long-term playoff success. You will not make a deep run without scoring points. I speak from experience. But we'll see what happens. If people continue to stumble, stranger things have happened. Sometimes that run to the championship doesn't make sense. Sometimes things just fall into place and it works out for you. So we'll see where AB ends up. Just a quick note on the pops for the season. We take a look at our running total here for the 10 weeks, or running average, I guess. Not much changes in the top 4. Jersey Birds and Gloop swap spots, and your commish drops to sole ownership of last place with that really poor decision to not start Joe Burrow in week 10. It happens. What are you going to do? A couple things to look forward to. Every game has playoff implications in week 11. Whether it's a team that has an outside shot or not, they're going to be playing a team that is looking to secure their playoff spot. So all games have playoff implications, but take note, we get the number 1 and number 2 scoring teams. We get Poncho versus Mr. Snuffy. Mr. Snuffy's already locked in a playoff spot, so while he is looking to get that first round bye, it's not the biggest deal ever. He'll be in the dance to see if he can get his 4th championship. So will this be the week that Poncho reasserts himself as the number 1 scoring team, knocks Mr. Snuffy off down a peg? We'll see. The other interesting game to take a look at would be, well, I guess they all have playoff implications. I'm just going to say, watch them all. Obviously, we all try hard for every single game, so it's not like we try any harder, but we'll have to see what happens here in the final 4 weeks as we head to the playoffs. Enjoy week 11.